In your film First Do No Farm, how do you demonstrate that health has been commodified and exploited in the last 20 years? Why has that happened? How can you prove it? And is this a phenomena that extends beyond America and into a country like ours where we feel that we have better regulation and we're not so steeped in commodity? For example, in the UK, you're not as likely to find, and here's the news presented by Pfizer. That's not like a sort of a British trope. So the question is, how has health been commodified and exploited in the last 2 decades? How can you prove it? And is it global? And if it is global, maybe the IPA there, the Indian Press Association, won't be so ebullient as you might anticipate, because I feel like India are pretty tied up into the pharmaceutical industry at this point. But yeah, I'd love to hear your response to that first question, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is a global issue, Russell. If I was to summarize it in one line, medical knowledge is under commercial control, but most doctors don't know that. So we have a pandemic of misinformed doctors and misinformed patients and unwittingly harmed patients based upon a number of factors that are the roots of why patients are getting information and doctors are getting information from biased and corrupted research. So research that's funded because it's likely to be profitable, not beneficial to patients. Biased reporting in the media, biased reporting in medical journals, commercial conflicts of interest, an inability of doctors to really engage in informed consent because they don't understand and then communicate health statistics. You add it all up, it is an absolute mess. And what does that mean? Essentially everything, almost everything invariably that hits the consultation room with doctor and patient has been corrupted to the degree where side effects, where safety and benefits of drugs are grossly exaggerated. And we show that through layers through the film. At the root of it, Russell, just to put it in very basic terms, is that we have the interests of big pharma and big food, because we cover a lot of the issue around the food industry too, are purely there to make money. Their legal obligation is to produce profit for shareholders, not to look after your health. But the real scandals are that those who have a responsibility to patients and scientific integrity, namely doctors, academic institutions, and medical journals, collude with industry for financial gain, and the regulators fail to prevent misconduct from industry. Why is that? Let me give you some cold hard facts. Regulator in this country, MHRA, gets 86% of its funding from pharma. The FDA gets 65% of its funding from pharma. So those interests, which are pathologically self-interested to make money, big corporations, has now infiltrated into the consultation room. There is no independent verification of data coming from pharma. And that's one of the low-hanging fruit bits in the movie that comes out, is that if we are to move forward, if we are to fix healthcare, we need to remove commercial distortions of the scientific evidence. And we can do that. And with one piece of legislation from now on, although drug companies can develop drugs, they should no longer be allowed to test them themselves. They have to be independently evaluated. And if the drugs are really good, Russell, if they do what they say that they claim to do, then they should have no fear for their drugs being independently evaluated. And of course, everybody loses, because you think, hold on, in the short term, of course, big pharma are making money. But actually, there is no real innovation going on if their business model is fraud and they're not even engaging in developing really good, new, important drugs. And we see that. The facts are very clear. Only about less than 10% of new drugs that have been manufactured in the last 2 decades are truly clinically significant in terms of better than previous drugs. Most drugs are copies of old ones, and probably double the amount of drugs, certainly from some data we've seen, that are innovative are actually proven to be more harmful. So what is the conclusion, Russell? In my view, very clear. The overall net effect of the pharmaceutical industry on society is a hugely negative one. Unfortunately, I will say this, and it sounds very controversial. Most doctors, first and foremost, I believe, are well-intentioned and want to do the right thing. They don't realize the information they're getting is being corrupted. But I think if you look at global health, if you look at what's going on in the UK, what's going on in the US, it's going down the wrong direction. And that means, for me, the medical profession needs to take a really good look in the mirror and ask themselves, is our net effect on society as the medical profession positive or negative? And unfortunately, Russell, at the moment, the evidence suggests that there's a very strong argument to be made that the overall net effect of the medical establishment on society unwittingly is a negative one. That is pretty shocking stuff.
Yes, it's a shocking conclusion. I enjoyed the way that you described the various tendrils that amount collectively to a chokehold over the various opportunities for gatekeeping and clarity, control over academia, control over big pharma, control over regulatory bodies, control over media. And I also enjoyed your suggestion that a independent regulatory body, when it comes to medications, new medications, would stymie the attempt to sort of keep putting out old hits. I was pretty astonished to learn that, by your reckoning, many drugs that are presented as novel are in fact retreads of old ideas. I mean, I find that pretty appalling when it happens in the entertainment industry. It's like a remake of that film, Arthur aside, that needed remaking. But it seems like, come up with some new drugs. Don't just go back to the old drugs of yesteryear, particularly as we're sort of, all of us have had to become amateur pharmacologists when it comes to the condemnation of white label medications that may have been effective during the pandemic period, but their efficacy had to be diminished, negated, overruled in order for the mRNA experiment to continue, as was plainly required, notably at least for profit, but there may be yet more behind that story. Now, you say that Big Pharma has infiltrated every aspect of the healthcare system. In the US, such things are kind of obvious. It's a explicitly for profit model. Front and center are all these big pharma drugs. Every commercial break, every news show, every aisle. It's entered into the sort of the great paradise for consumerism, America, in an extremely vivid, lurid and obvious way. But even when you're in a hospital in our country, it's shocking to see how evident private interests are in an ordinary hospital ward. You would sort of look at PPE equipment, tissues, sheets, catering. It's just crept in like a fog, a suffocating fog, with the obvious attempt to sort of it seems to me, strangulate public medicine and public healthcare. How is it that even in a country like the UK, where, so when in our country you hear about an MP took a reported £4,000 in order to, it's always such low numbers of money in the UK. In America, it's like they all own stocks and shares in Pfizer and Moderna, even though we had those revolving door stories about Moderna, like government officials taking jobs at Moderna, even though we had sort of massive 10-year schemes of investment into Moderna, even though in the EU we had the peculiar relationship between Ursula von der Leyen and Albert Bourla, even though there are sort of outside of America vivid demonstrations of obvious pharmaceutical corruption, not to mention the pre-pandemic period where it was commonplace and understood, whether it was the Sackler family and the opioid crisis, or the numerous times that Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer have had to settle out of court for enormous sums of money because of medical negligence or pharmacological ineptitude. It's somehow during the pandemic period, they once again, through some marketing endeavour that I still am baffled by, managed to reframe themselves as a beneficial, net positive to gain, say, your earlier assertion when it comes to the well-being of the planet's population. We can't continue to bring you this beautiful content without the support of our partners. America, listen up. The world is getting more and more unpredictable. Assassination attempts, rumours of civil war, unstable stock markets, and now the looming threat of bird flu. Do you know there's a bird flu summit this October? The first topic on the agenda is mass fatality management planning. Doesn't that send chills down your spine? The good news is this: you don't have to be scared if you're prepared. The wellness company created the medical emergency kit. It's packed with life-saving medications like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, antibiotics like amoxicillin and Z-Pak, and it's all backed by experts like Dr. Peter McCulloch, the kind of doctor we all need, the kind of doctor that fought for truth during COVID. This is his product. A few clicks and this kit is delivered directly to your door. Your medical emergency kit isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. Protect your family by preparing now. Head over to twc.health/brand and do use the code BRAND to ensure that you get $30 off. Do not wait till it's too late. Act now. Take control and ensure that you're protected against whatever comes next, because you know they got stuff coming next. So that's twc.health/brand and use that code BRAND to save $30 plus, I can't even believe this, there's free shipping available right now. How have they infiltrated every aspect of the healthcare? How has that happened? What's the proof of that?
Yeah, so it's increasing both visible and invisible power over time, Russell. And I think, they have done it because their primary interest, obviously, to make profit for their shareholders from a drug company's perspective. And I got this pretty much verbatim from the CEO of AstraZeneca when I debated him in the Cambridge University Union in 2019. And the motion put forward, which I was opposed, I was asked by the BMJ, the British Medical Journal, to be part of a team of 3 people to oppose the motion from AstraZeneca, which is we need more new drugs. But what they were effectively saying is we need more people to be taking more drugs. And what does that mean? And the ideal scenario, Russell, from them, from a financial perspective, is if they could, they would get our kids or babies on lifelong medication, right, since birth, so that they can make more money. But what they would do is the next stage of that is not just a recommendation. If they could, they'd get it mandated.
Yeah.
Right? And exactly. And we've seen news reports only a couple of weeks ago in the Mail, I think Daily Mail covered it, saying that 15-year-old kids to be recommended to take statins to slash heart attack rates. And I was like, this is absolutely appalling. This is unbelievable. But this is their pathologically self-interested way. So the way they do it, Russell, to answer your question, is they do it by changing the law, by influencing politicians, by simultaneously influencing the media. They also have something in place called opposition fragmentation. When people basically challenge their, dare I say it, bullshit, they will do everything they can to smear those individuals, suppress that information, because they want to keep the conflict hidden. They don't want a conflict going to the mainstream. Because if conflict goes into the mainstream, those people who are speaking from a place of values and truth, they're going to win. They don't want that to happen. So they do everything. So, for example, I have been a victim of this for a decade. The sugar industry went after me at the beginning when I came out in 2012, 13, saying sugar's a major issue, and I was called a quack and whatever else. And of course, eventually, through our first documentary film I made, we managed to influence and bring the sugary drinks tax in because it premiered in the UK Parliament. So there are ways through this, but this is what they do.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I was unaware of your earlier work with sugar, even though I'm sure we must have touched on it previously. You got some big hitters there in that movie. I can see how with someone like Callum Means contributing, you could establish the kind of intention to create patience for life, dependency for life, bad diets leading to pharmaceutical requirements. With the contributions of Bobby Kennedy and your earlier astonishing insight into the intention to prescribe statins to teenagers, it's difficult to imagine that you didn't touch on mandated vaccines and increased vaccine programs for children. If Bobby Kennedy was a participant recently, Bobby talked about the sort of, again, this is a story you can barely talk about. You might as well sort of wave a swastika around as to say that it appears that there is some evidence that there's a causal relationship between the vaccine program such as it stands in the United States of America. Let's just confine it to that for now, and autism. How do you cover a subject like that in your film?
We deliberately, and I'll tell you why, we didn't touch the vaccine issue at all, because we still feel, and I thought in terms of what's going on, and on a reflection of the talks I've been giving around the world, talking about the vaccine issue, is people need to walk before they can run. So when I give my lectures, and I've given lectures to even completely indoctrinated doctors one way on the COVID vaccine being safe and effective, and I can say this with my hand on my heart, by the end of my talk, completely changed their view, right? But I've got there by talking them through the system beforehand. So for John Ioannidis, I mentioned briefly in the film, he's cited the Stephen Hawking of medicine, in my view, most cited medical researcher in the world, professor of medicine and statistics at Stanford. 2006, Russell, he wrote a paper, which is the most cited, downloaded medical research paper in the world. It was called Why Most Medical Research Findings Are False, right? Richard Horton, editor of The Lancet, 2015, wrote an editorial saying that half of the medical published literature may simply be untrue. Science has taken a turn towards darkness. Who's going to take the first step to clean up the system? So we had to take people through a journey of understanding the system first. I think once they get to that, by the end of the film, I think the penny will drop that they should at least ask questions on the vaccine at the very least. But one of the people in the film, we got a lot of credible people, who is an absolute giant in terms of medical credibility, and no doctor's going to be able to ignore. And I think it's going to be very, very hard for the mainstream press to criticize her, is the former editor and chief of the BMJ, Dr. Fiona Godley. And she is very powerful in the film. And she alludes to the fact that medical, research, what's published in medical journals needs to be treated with skepticism. And what most doctors don't know, Russell, is that medical journals are businesses, and they take millions often from big pharma. So they have also been captured, Russell. This is the other issue. So there's no public funding of many of these institutions anymore. And the reason why that's important is when things were publicly funded, and we can ask about where the money's going to come from in a second, you get with, governments in place that are doing their duty for the public, it's there to serve the public, you get greater independence, greater scrutiny, for example. And over time, what's happened because of political ideology, where we've talked about the market functions best if we let it let it be free, and that means we start commodifying healthcare, education, etc. You know this very, very well. Actually, the evidence suggests, forget about ideology for a second, those institutions, those I would say basic rights of human beings, if you like, they then get corroded and corrupted, and then you have basically a health and mental welfare mess, and that's where we're at. So these are the things that people need to try and understand. And of course, coming back to one of the counters that may come, say, Dr. Maharaj, I've been asked this in talks before, if you don't get private funding of, say, the regulators in this country for medicines, who's going to fund them? The government don't have any money. Russell, the money is there. It's just in the wrong place. We're talking about these big corporations who've got maybe $1 trillion hidden in tax havens. Not just that. I'm not against people making money doing the right thing, but their business model is fraud. So we've got a situation where essentially we are robbing the poor and giving to the rich. And this needs to change.
Bobby Kennedy said that on day one, in the event that the Maha, part of the MAGA movement, comes to government, he will begin a top-to-bottom analysis of FDA corruption, of Anthony Fauci's actions, of what went on in the pandemic. In a sense, the pandemic was the pharmaceutical industry's forlorn Christmas, a giant festival of profit opportunity accompanied by censorship, control of information, smearing of vocal successful opponents. It amounted to a bonanza too for governments who are able to legitimately impose authority that would have previously been unthinkable. It's into this environment that Dr. Aseem Malhotra's new movie, First Do No Farm, comes. Let's have a look at the trailer and discuss that in this, whether or not that during this post-pandemic period, we could have a legitimate conversation about reining in the pharmaceutical industry and its terrifying power.
Between 2003 and 2016, fines imposed on large pharmaceutical companies for fraud and other illegal activities amounted to $33 billion.
You have to do something. We are considered acceptable collateral damage.
We're talking about many millions of people killed by research fraud in medical science.
Between 40 and 60,000 Americans died. So this is like approximately equal to the number of Americans who died in the Vietnam War, died from taking Vioxx.
We need to apply quite a big dose of skepticism to the medical literature. They know they might get $1 million, for example, for publishing the trial. And that, I don't really see how you can manage that as a conflict of interest.
You are going to be obliterated if you take on this position.
I effectively lost my job. The thing you care about is I don't want to lose my memory. I want to be able to do the things I normally do in life. That's what Alzheimer's robs you of.
The FDA is not going to protect doctors and the public and the insurers and Medicare from this deception about the clinical value of this drug.
If you knew, why didn't you do anything?
Patient began to verbalize feelings of killing other people, and then himself.
They are now out of control as an entity that is purely there to make money. A psychopathic entity.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more uncensored content where free speech can flourish, join our live stream. Click the link right here to watch the next video if you want to, or become a member of a growing movement. Download the Rumble app and you'll be informed every time we make a new piece of content. Stay free.